As the three-eye atlas debate continues to rage, one thing remains extremely unclear. Assuming that this is an artificial object, and that remains a very big assumption, what might its goal be? Why is this object passing through our solar system, coming fairly close to 3 different planets within our solar system while not making a close approach to Earth? That, of course, is assuming that it doesn't execute some sort of crazy maneuver while it's hidden on the other side of the sun, but assuming that it doesn't do that, then what is its objective? What drew the makers of Three-Eye Atlas to our solar system in the first place? In my previous episode, I explored the possibility that Three-Eye Atlas might have been the point of origin for the famous WOW signal, and the WOW signal might have actually been a radar scan of our solar system, studying the various planets in the so-called Goldilocks zone of our sun, and then once the solar system was seen as being something interesting, that's when Three-Eye Atlas began to make its approach. But what if it sent probes ahead of time? What if it sent small craft that were very difficult for us to detect in advance of its approach to determine which planets were the most promising? And what would happen if one of these objects had malfunctioned, plunged through our atmosphere, had some sort of problem with its heat shield, and crashed into the Pacific, say in 2014? Well, an interstellar object did indeed crash in the Pacific off the coast of New Guinea in 2014, and it turns out that its point of origin was not all that different than Three-Eye Atlas. And interestingly enough, if we are to assume that Three-Eye Atlas is a partially natural and partially artificial object, say an asteroid ship, well, this probe also seems to be just that. All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good morning, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. I am here in a hotel room in Sydney, just a magnificent place that I was lucky enough to get because of my friends at Marriott, at least get halfway affordably because of my friends at Marriott. And now I'm leaving Sydney on my way to Parkes Radio Observatory, where there's been some SETI and breakthrough listen work done in recent years. So looking forward to that. An engineer there happens to be a viewer of mine, so it looks like I'm going to get some inside access, perhaps. I'm really looking forward to that, and then after that, I'll be heading to Brisbane, but my visit to Australia is starting to wrap up, and in some ways, I'm a little anxious to get back to the UK, because I've really loved this country. I've loved the people. The people are utterly fantastic, but I've just had one strange experience after another. Aside from the thing that happened with the rental car company. And by the way, I'm giving away those shirts at the end of this video, 3 shirts to random donors who supported my channel in my time of need. So 3 of these new Three-Eye Atlas shirts that I have right now. I'm going to go ahead and be awarding those at the end of the video. And all of that having been said, aside from that issue, took a nasty fall in Brisbane, and then I ended up in the hospital night before last with a hunk of something in my throat. It was just from a restaurant. Oh my God, I'd never had anything like that happen before. Ambulance, the works. So yeah. On 2 occasions now this year, I've ended up in the ER fearing for my life. It's the strangest thing because I've never had these sorts of experiences before. So I don't know. Time to get back to a little bit of normalcy, I think. All that having been said, though, there's nothing normal about what's going on right now with Three-Eye Atlas. And after doing some analysis of another incident that a lot of you may be familiar with that happened off the coast of the Pacific, an interstellar meteor or an interstellar object of some kind apparently impacted in the ocean off the coast coast of New Guinea in 2014. The reason we know that it was interstellar is because of its velocity. It was traveling so fast that had it not hit our planet, it would have escaped the sun's gravity. That's how quickly it was going. That's how we can generally determine why objects are interstellar. It's because of their speed. Also, the trajectory makes a big difference as well, but the speed is the biggest issue. All of that having been said, though, after Avi Loeb and the Galileo project determined that, this object might have been interstellar. Something strange about it, too. It also penetrated too far into the atmosphere to have been a regular meteor. There are a lot of things about this object that we'll be talking about later that struck Avi Loeb and the Galileo project as being very, very strange. So they commissioned an expedition to try to find some remnants, some debris near the estimated impact site. They had a ship and a magnetic sledge that was dragged along the bottom of the ocean to pick up anything that might have been magnetic. And what they came up with was wreckage of sorts. Spherules. Spherules are these tiny little, not quite microscopic, very, very small, a millimeter, sometimes even smaller than that are left over in the remnants of a meteor impact. Tiny objects that were formed when a meteor passes through our atmosphere and gets superheated, and the materials congeal down into these tiny little fragments as the object explodes and impacts either on land or into the ocean. He found quite a number of these spherules, but the strange thing about them was that some of them didn't resemble spherules from any meteor that we are familiar with. As a matter of fact, there were materials that seemed to be more consistent with something artificial. But here's the thing that made me a little suspicious. Number one, the point of origin or estimated point of origin for this object, but more importantly, the composition of the object. Even though there definitely were spherules that bore a greater resemblance to something artificial than something natural, well, there were also spherules that were very natural and very consistent with something we would expect to find in a meteor impact. Strange combination, but at the same time, the sort of thing that we would expect from an asteroid ship. And therefore, if 3I Atlas is also an asteroid ship, might there be a connection? So from June the 14th to June the 28th of 2023, Avi Loeb led an expedition to the Pacific Ocean to retrieve remnants of the meteor dubbed IM-1, which was listed by NASA in the CNEOS catalog of fireballs and formally confirmed to be interstellar in origin by the U.S. Space Command in a formal letter to NASA. About 850 droplets or spherules were collected and brought to analysis in the state-of-the-art geochemistry laboratory of Professor Stein Jacobson at Harvard University. About a tenth of the spherules retrieved from this expedition showed a highly enriched composition with elements like beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium having an abundance of up to 1,000 times the solar elemental composition. So what does this mean? Well, apparently some of these spherules, although not all of them, only about a tenth of them, showed these very strange elements being present. Now, beryllium is a substance used in nuclear reactors. Beryllium naturally reflects neutrons, and beryllium plates are used to reflect neutrons back into a nuclear reaction in order to excite the intensity of the reaction, so to speak. Whereas if you want to slow down the reaction, you have boron plates that you expose to the core, and this absorbs neutrons, slowing down a nuclear fission reaction. And then you have lanthanum, which is used in a number of high-tech products, and then of course uranium, which is also used in nuclear reactors. And as I said, this abundance was up to 1,000 times the solar elemental composition. But how do we know that these spherules actually came from this object? Might they just have been there before the impact even took place? Well, just to be sure, Avi Loeb and his team dredged the sea outside of this area, a test area, so to speak, to see if the same spherules came up. If they did, then they would know that they didn't originate with this IM1 object. And lo and behold, the magnetic sledge picked up nothing. Only in the area where the impact took place were these spherules actually found. But in spite of this, skeptics speculated that the beryllium, lanthanum, uranium signature might represent either human-made coal ash or some sort of volcanic remnants. But last year, the Galileo Project research team conducted a detailed analysis that demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that the BeLaU composition is different from that of coal ash. And this week, or rather a couple of weeks ago at the time of the publication of this article, the scientist Dr. Eugenia Hung from Jacobson's laboratory led a paper co-authored by 4 students and Dr. Stein and Dr. Loeb as well, which reports precise elemental data for other alternatives besides extraterrestrial alternatives to test the speculations raised by the skeptics. And in short, their findings were that any other objects, such as Australian tektites or Australasian tektites, that is, these things closely resemble the elemental abundance pattern of the upper continental crust of Earth for all the elements analyzed, and are very different from the spherules that were found. Now, to give a little bit more background information on this object, the entry of IM1 into the Earth's atmosphere on January 8th of 2014 resulted in 3 atmospheric detonations, which were detected by U.S. government satellite sensors 84 kilometers north of Manus Island, again off the coast of New Guinea. The arrival velocity was more than 45 kilometers per second, but here was the problem. This object should not have been able to pierce that far into the atmosphere at that velocity if it were a normal meteor. A normal meteor should have disintegrated far higher up in the atmosphere if it were going that fast, which is one of the reasons that astronomers have been so critical of this discovery and feel that all of this information must be in error. But it just isn't. The more effort that's been put into confirming the results of this expedition, the more certain we are that this object did indeed come from an interstellar destination, and that the spherules that were gathered came from this object. So the 850 or so spherules that were found were categorized into 3 different groups: S-type, I-type, and G-type. And then the strange ones, the ones that didn't fit into these categories that are typical for meteors of a variety of different kinds, not just interstellar meteors, were classified as D-type spherules. And the D-type spherules were the ones that had this very strange composition. But keep in mind, 90% of the spherules were actually quite similar to the types of spherules we would expect to find with normal meteor impacts. What does this mean? Well, it seems to indicate that we have a natural meteor that perhaps had some kind of technological modification to it. And that is very similar to what we think 3I Atlas might be, an asteroid ship of some kind, indicating that we're dealing with a consistent technology here, an alien species that makes use of natural objects, introducing their own technology where necessary, but making use of in situ materials to provide them with protection from the rigors of interstellar travel. And in situ resource utilization is something that we're planning to do while colonizing the solar system as well. Now, when I started to develop this theory, I was assuming that when I actually examined the relative trajectories of these 2 objects, that is to say 3I Atlas and IM1, they would be so wildly different that I would have to come up with some sort of far-fetched justification as to why they would both have encountered us, even though they came from such different regions of the sky. But then I examined where the 2 objects actually seemed to have originated from, and I was utterly shocked. No, they're not coming from exactly the same region of the sky, but when it comes right down to it, they're coming from the same direction. We're talking about a difference of 4.5 degrees of right ascension and 64 degrees of declination. That's 64 out of 360 and 4.5 degrees out of 360. Both strangely unlikely events, and yet those are the realities. Now, of course, again, this is not exactly the same region of the sky. It would require a significant trajectory shift on the part of either 3I Atlas or IM1 for these things to match up. But again, if we're talking about artificial objects that are capable of maneuvering on their own, which of course we certainly are with both of these objects, it's really not that big of a stretch that the two of them might have come from the same original point of origin. Also, keep in mind that IM1 impacted our planet in 2014, so if it was sent substantially in advance of 3I Atlas, 11 years in advance, then yes, it is very, very conceivable that both objects might have originated at the same point in space if 3I Atlas followed a different trajectory after getting its data from the IM1 probe. Again, all speculation, but still a very strange coincidence. All of these things are strange coincidences. In 2014, we have a meteor that didn't behave like a meteor impacting our planet off the coast of New Guinea. In 2017, Oumuamua makes a very close approach with Earth, behaving very strangely, including accelerating out of the solar system, and now 3I Atlas is passing through our solar system as well, perhaps after responding to an analysis conducted by probes that it sent out, because just because one crashed doesn't mean that all of them crashed. It could have been that this was just one example of many that were researching our planet, and perhaps Earth was determined to be not the best planet for 3I Atlas to make a close approach to. Perhaps our preponderance of nuclear weapons and hostile nature made it not the best planet for 3I Atlas to examine, so instead, the mothership passed through our solar system at a very safe distance from Earth, behind the sun when it was making its closest approach, but close enough to Mars, Venus, and Jupiter to conduct an analysis of other promising planets, because after all, the Jovian moons may also host life beneath their icy surface. Again, all speculation, but a very interesting coincidence that an object that appears to be a technologically modified meteor impacted our planet just a decade before what might be a technologically modified asteroid is making its way through our solar system now. So yes, once again, I acknowledge that this is just a theory. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and send an email to Avi Loeb asking him his opinion on all of this. Granted, this object, this interstellar meteor, if that is indeed what it was, came from an area of the sky that's similar to where 3I Atlas appears to have originated from, but still a substantial difference between the two. Then again, if we are talking about objects capable of maneuvering on their own, it's not an enormous separation. They came from the same general direction. It is an interesting coincidence in a year of interesting coincidences when it comes to 3I Atlas. And if indeed this object was a partially natural and partially artificial piece of alien technology, is this something consistent with a civilization that's been paying us regular visits? Is this a civilization that cannibalizes or just makes use of natural materials, natural raw materials wherever they can find them, and combines it with their own technology in order to make it easier for them to carry out interstellar travel? Well, Until we get some more information, it's going to be impossible to tell. But once again, it is a compelling reason for us to divert the Juno probe, if that is at all possible, divert the Juno probe away from its current orbit around Jupiter and try to intercept 3I Atlas directly. Only by a close range flyby are we really going to get an excellent image of this object, given the fact that it's not going to be passing incredibly close to any of our really powerful telescopes. It's going to be hidden behind the sun. As a matter of fact, it's hidden behind the sun right now for a considerable amount of time, and conveniently at the time when we could get the best look at it. That being the case, then Juno is really our best option to try to get an up-close and personal look at 3I Atlas. And given just how unique this object is, regardless of what it might be, natural or no, it's definitely worth the effort. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And once again, stay angry about space, and the winners of the 3I Atlas t-shirt giveaway are coming at you right now.